Hey, this is Lex, aka Smarmy Clothes, with another What the Craft tutorial. The skirt I'm going to show you how to make today has lots of fluffy tulle, and then there's a layer of chevron peeking out from underneath, so I call it the peekaboo skirt. This skirt would be really cute for prom or any other formal event. And you can really do any color and print combination that you want. You could do the peekaboo layer in a floral print, you could do it in a contrasting color to your tulle color, or you can match the colors for both. So for your underlayer, you need a piece of fabric that's at least twice the width of your waist. You can use either your natural waist or your low waist, it just depends on where you prefer to wear your skirt. For the tulle, you want at least 3 times your waist size for the width and 30 inches for the length. And last but not least, you want a 3-inch wide piece of elastic cut to about 2 to 4 inches smaller than your waist. The first step is going to be to sew our underlayer into one big loop. My piece of fabric was wide enough that I could take one piece and sew it together at the selvages. If you have to use multiple pieces, just sew them together. So here's our finished seam, just one long straight seam. So now we need to decide how we're going to finish the hem. You could leave it unhemmed if you're using a knit fabric because it won't fray. If you have a serger, you can just serge the edge, or you can turn the hem under 1/2 inch and stitch it, like so. I am a lazy ass, so I took the serger way out. So here's our big tube of fabric with the bottom edge hemmed, and I want to divide the top raw edge into 4 equal quarters. And the easiest way to do that is to mark both ends while it's laying flat, and my other end is the seam, so it's basically already marked for me. So then you want to line up those 2 marks you just made, make sure you've got it all laying flat, and mark the ends again. Now let's move on to the tulle. So here I've got my tulle that again is 3 times my waist size. I just got 3 yards, close enough. And again, this is a 60-inch tulle that they fold in half when they put it on the bolt. So folded in half, it's about 30 inches long, which is perfect for our skirt. So now we want to fold it in half the long way, and to make sure I don't have any twists in here, I'm going to go through the whole thing and make sure it's laying flat. Once I get everything laying flat, I'm going to line up the 2 cut edges of the tulle, and I'm going to start pinning them together. So again, that top edge is where the tulle is pre-folded on the bolt. The right where I'm pinning are the 2 cut edges of the tulle, and all the way down at the bottom that you can't see right now is the raw edges of the tulle. Go ahead and give that a straight stitch with your sewing machine, or you could use a serger. So just like we did with the underlayer, we want to divide the tulle into 4 equal quarters. If you use the seam as one mark, fold it in half from there, and mark the other end. And you might find it's easier to mark the tulle with a safety pin or a clothespin because the regular straight pins do tend to just fall right out. So I'm going to grab the spot I just marked in one hand, and my first spot in the other hand. Fold my whole piece of tulle in half again, lining those 2 spots up. And then I mark the 2 layers at the fold, and I've got the whole thing divided into quarters. Okay, so now we want to find our seam, and I'm going to open up the fabric so it's laying flat, and I'm going to do a basting stitch starting at the seam, going all the way around this big loop of fabric until I get back to the seam. You do not want to backstitch at any point, nor do you want to sew over the beginning of your stitches. Make sure you leave your markers in place, and you want to sew about 1/4 inch from the edge. You also want to give yourself several inches of thread tail on both ends of your stitching. And if you look here, you can see my seam, and you can see where my stitches start and where my stitches end. There's a little bit of a gap there, maybe 1/2 inch. So now we want to put the tulle and the underlayer together, and this is going to require a little bit of tulle wrestling. In a lot of cases in sewing, you line things up right sides together. However, in this case, we want to line up the wrong side of our tulle with the right side of our lining or underlayer. I think it's easiest to start at the seams of both, get those lined up, and then you want to line up the quarter markings that you made on the tulle with the quarter markings that you made on the underlayer. Now once you have the 2 layers pinned together at the quarter marks, you can start gathering the tulle to fit the underlayer. So starting at our seam again, where we have those long thread tails, grab a thread tail and just pull on it gently, and your fabric should start to gather. And once you've got the tulle gathered to about the same width as the underlayer, you can start evening out the gathers and pinning the 2 layers together. So here I've got the first quarter gathered and pinned to the underlayer, and you're just going to repeat that around the entire skirt. So here's my whole top edge with the tulle ruffled to the same width as the underlayer, and the 2 layers are pinned together. Now you want to baste where you've pinned exactly the same way that we basted the tulle. You want to go fairly slowly, checking the underlayer every so often to make sure it's laying flat and there aren't any weird tucks there. So we're going to baste about 1/4 inch from the edge all the way around the skirt. And again, I like to start at the seam so I know my starting point, and you don't want to backstitch. And when you're done, it'll look something like this. Now we'll focus on the elastic. Fold the elastic in half, right sides together. If it doesn't really have a right side, whatever side you want. Pin the raw edges together, and then sew where you've pinned using about a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And as you can see, I've used a straight stitch. Now I'm going to open up that seam so it's laying flat, and you want to zigzag the raw edges down. Just like this. And if you use thread that matches your elastic, the stitching is pretty much invisible. So now we're going to, you guessed it, divide the elastic up into equal quarters. Now I should have mentioned this earlier, but when you are marking the underlayer of your skirt, it would be a really good idea to use a fabric marker along with the pins, because you're going to have to mark it again here if you didn't. So just like we did with the tulle and the underlayer, we now want to take each quarter mark on the skirt and line it up with each quarter mark on the elastic. I'm sewing the right side of my skirt to the wrong side of the elastic. If you'd prefer to pin and sew right sides together for some reason, you can totally do that. Now, if you were making a skirt that didn't have quite so much volume in the gathering, you could actually skip the hand gathering part and just stretch the elastic as you sew it to the fabric. And that would create gathering all by itself. In our case, we've got just a little bit too much fabric to do that. So we're going to find where our basting stitches start and end, which should be right at your seam. And we're going to do the same thing we did with the tulle. We're going to grab one of those tails and just start gently pulling. The fabric will start gathering, and once you have it to the same width of the elastic, you can even out the gathers and pin it down. And I just go 1/4 at a time until the whole skirt's gathered and pinned. And meanwhile, as if wrestling with a tulle isn't enough to deal with, I have this sitting on my table next to me. But it does give me a chance to say that if you have any trouble with the gathering method I show in this video, I have several other videos showing other methods that you might find easier. For example, you might find it a lot easier if you just do it all by hand. So check out my gathering by hand tutorial if you have any trouble. Okay, back to the skirt. We've got it all pinned together. Now we just need to sew the skirt to the elastic. You want to use a zigzag stitch for this, because if you don't, when you stretch the elastic, your stitches are likely to break. Again, it's okay to go slow. Make sure all your layers are laying nice and straight, and you just zigzag around the whole thing, back stitching at the end. Now when you're done, you might want to go back and top stitch the elastic from the right side, just to give it a nice professional finish, and just make sure you use a zigzag stitch. And that's it, you did it. You're all set for prom or whatever awesome event you're going to wear your new rad skirt to. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my future tutorials. And remember to visit whatthecraft.com for more tutorials, tips, and kick-ass patterns.